When you picture the Roman army, what do you see? Lines of armored legionaries marching in perfect formation, shields locked, short swords drawn, and a wall of discipline advancing like a machine. It's an image burned into popular memory, but there's one thing you almost never imagine: a Roman holding a bow. Strange, isn't it? Because in the ancient world, everyone used archers. Yet somehow the idea of a Roman archer just feels wrong. Why is that? Was it arrogance, tradition, or something far more practical and even genius hidden beneath the surface? Welcome to Heroic History, your daily dive into the incredible world of ancient warfare. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe so we can keep sharing epic battle stories every single day. In this episode, we're going to uncover the truth behind why Rome didn't rely on archers in the beginning and why, even after learning their value, they never truly embraced them. To understand that, you have to look deep into how Rome built its armies in the first place. If you really want to understand the Roman army, not just what they did, but how they thought, you've got to start with one word: virtus. It's a tricky word to translate into English. It doesn't just mean virtue or bravery. It's more like a whole moral code packed into a single idea: courage, discipline, honor, and above all, the willingness to face danger head-on. In Roman military culture, virtus was earned in the press of battle, communis, face-to-face, man-to-man. That's why the Romans idolized their legionaries, those close combat specialists who fought with the gladius, the short stabbing sword. Using a sword meant you had to stand your ground, keep formation, and look your enemy right in the eye. That took guts, and that's what virtus was all about. Archery, by contrast, didn't quite fit that image. To a traditional Roman mindset, standing far away and shooting arrows seemed, well, a bit unmanly. The Greeks before them felt the same way. They called their archers siloi, which literally means bare or light, implying that these were poor, low-class soldiers who lacked the heavy armor and courage of real warriors. Even Julius Caesar, who was one of the most practical commanders Rome ever produced, never treated archers as a central part of his strategy. In his commentaries, when he mentions them, usually Cretan or Numidian archers, it's always in passing. They're there to protect the flanks, to harass the enemy from a distance, or to cover the retreat of the infantry, but they're never the stars of the show. The spotlight always belonged to the legionary, marching in perfect discipline, ready to deliver that decisive close-range shock that could break an enemy line. But here's where it gets interesting. The Romans didn't reject ranged combat entirely, they just Romanized it. Instead of filling their legions with archers, they developed other ways to strike from afar, tools and tactics that still fit their cultural ideals of strength and directness. The most famous example is the pilum, that heavy Roman javelin you always see in movies. A typical pilum was about 6.5 feet long, with an iron shank roughly 2 feet in length. Its purpose wasn't just to kill, it was designed to disrupt. When thousands of legionaries hurled their pila, thus before closing in, those spears would slam into the enemy's shields. The soft iron tip bent on impact, making it nearly impossible to pull out. That meant the enemy either had to drop their shield or fight with it dragging uselessly on the ground. In either case, the Romans now had the upper hand when they charged in for hand-to-hand combat. So, even here, you see that Roman logic at work. They used a ranged weapon, but not to stay at range. It was all about paving the way for the kind of close-quarters fight that truly tested a soldier's virtus. As warfare evolved, so did Roman tactics. By the later centuries of the empire, they introduced a smaller, more versatile ranged weapon called the plumbata, a lead-weighted throwing dart, often called the martio barbali in Latin. These were about 18 in long, feathered for flight, and deadly accurate in skilled hands. A late Roman writer named Vegetius, who loved to write about military reform, tells us that every legionary carried 5 of these darts tucked behind his shield, ready to throw before the fighting even began. That's a storm of projectiles, a living, marching rain of lead and iron. Vegetius even remarked that these plumbata allowed legionaries to take the place of archers. They could injure both men and horses before the enemy got close enough to swing a sword. And yet, unlike archery, this didn't challenge Roman identity. It fitted. Throwing darts still felt like a soldier's act, not the work of a distant skirmisher. This was Rome's genius, finding cultural compromises that preserved their ideals while keeping up with military reality. Still, history records that Roman recruits called Tyrones trained with wooden bows known as arcus ligneus. That tells us the Romans fully understood the value of long-range skill. After all, just about every army in the known world used bows. Ignoring that would have been a serious disadvantage. But rather than turning their legionaries into full-time archers, Rome took a smarter, more practical route. They left real sustained range combat to the auxilia sagittarii, specialized non-citizen troops who were already experts with the bow. It was a perfect example of Roman pragmatism. Instead of reinventing the wheel, they simply borrowed the best from others and made it their own. The Romans were masters at taking other people's strengths and folding them seamlessly into their system. And nowhere is that clearer than in how they approached specialized warfare, especially long-range combat. The word auxilia literally means helpers or support troops, but don't let that fool you. These were professional soldiers, often just as tough and important as the legionaries they fought beside. By the time of the early empire, around the 1st century, the auxilia made up nearly half of Rome's total military strength, hundreds of thousands of men. These units were organized into formal cohorts, often called cohorts sagittaria, cohorts of archers. And this system worked beautifully. It let Rome keep its citizen legions focused on what they did best, heavy infantry combat and engineering, while the auxilia filled every other role the battlefield demanded. Yet Rome didn't truly grasp the real power of the bow. Not until one battle taught them the hard way. A single disaster forced them to rethink everything, and it would change the role of this weapon in Roman history forever. 50,000 Roman soldiers, 7 full legions, marching confidently into the desert of Mesopotamia. Their commander, Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in Roman history, had come to do what Rome always did, conquer. But this time, it wouldn't go that way. By the end of that campaign, nearly every one of those men would be dead or captured. The Battle of Carrhae, fought in 53 BC, was nothing short of catastrophic for Rome. Crassus' army, about 40,000 to 50,000 men, was almost completely annihilated by a much smaller Parthian force led by a brilliant commander named Serena. Historians estimate the Parthian army numbered only around 10,000 men, yet their losses were minimal. The contrast was staggering. So, how did this happen? Serena used a deadly combination of 2 things the Romans weren't prepared for: composite bows and mobility. His troops included highly trained mounted archers, horsemen who could fire arrows at full gallop, and heavily armored cavalry called cataphracts. The Parthian horse archers had range, speed, and endurance. They could strike from 150 to 200 meters away, far beyond the reach of Roman javelins. But the real genius of Serenus' plan lay in logistics. He brought with him an entire supply train, about 1,000 camels loaded with spare arrows. Every time the Parthians began to run low, they simply resupplied from the camel caravan and kept shooting. The Romans, expecting the usual close-quarters fight, had no answer for this. The most humiliating moment came when the Parthian cavalry pretended to retreat. As the Roman legions charged, the horsemen twisted in their saddles and shot backward, the famous Parthian shot. It was devastating. Legionaries trained for hand-to-hand combat were cut down long before they could close the distance. Crassus' formations disintegrated under a rain of arrows, and the desert became a graveyard for Rome's finest. This was an awakening. Rome realized, painfully, that archery and long-range warfare couldn't just be an afterthought anymore. By the time of the Principate, Rome had learned its lesson. Archers became standard fixtures of the Roman army. Their role evolved too. In earlier times, they'd simply screen the main army, protecting it from skirmishers or harassing the enemy at a distance. But under the Empire, their tactics became more sophisticated, more integrated. They weren't just firing randomly from the sidelines anymore. They were a coordinated arm of the legion. Julius Caesar himself described using archers to cover his cavalry's flanks or to stand behind infantry lines, raining arrows on advancing enemies to break their formations before impact. Their volleys didn't win battles outright, but they set up the conditions for victory. Think of it as softening the enemy, disorganizing them so that the heavy infantry could strike with maximum effect. In sieges, archers became indispensable. They provided covering fire, pinned down defenders, and allowed engineers to move siege towers or battering rams safely. And when facing other ranged enemies, like Eastern horse archers or tribal slingers, they became the shield that kept the legions intact on the advance. Rome also began to experiment with combined arms formations, something remarkably modern in concept. One of the best examples comes from the 2nd century AD under Emperor Hadrian. A Roman governor named Arrian faced the Alans, fierce nomadic warriors from the steppes known for their heavy cavalry and horse archers. Arrian didn't rely on brute strength. He organized his troops in 10 deep ranks. The first 8 ranks were legionaries with shields and pila heavy javelins. The 9th rank consisted of archers and the 10th mounted archers. So, when the Alans charged, the Romans met them with a storm of missiles before the infantry even clashed. The cataphract charge faltered, their momentum lost, and the Roman formation held. It was a master class in adaptation. The Romans had learned to blend short-range power with long-range precision. So, where did these archers come from? Pretty much everywhere Rome touched, but some regions stood out for their legendary skill. Let's start with the West, specifically the island of Crete. For centuries, the Cretans had a reputation across the Mediterranean as expert bowmen. Long before the Romans even arrived on the scene, Greek city-states like Athens and Sparta hired Cretan mercenaries to give them an edge in battle. The Cretans used composite bows made from horn, sinew, and wood, powerful and accurate weapons capable of launching arrows far beyond what most European bows could manage at the time. When Rome began expanding, it wasn't long before they followed the same logic. Julius Caesar himself employed Cretan archers during his campaigns in Gaul in the 50s BC. He valued them not just for their accuracy, but for their discipline. Ancient sources even note that Cretan archers sometimes fought on the front line alongside legionaries, a mark of respect that few auxiliary units ever earned. They were, in effect, elite troops within the auxilia system. Then, moving east, we find another major source, Syria and Anatolia. From the disastrous defeat at Carrhae, Syrian and Anatolian archers became indispensable. Cities like Hama, ancient Hamath in Syria, were famous for producing archers of almost legendary skill. In these regions, boys learned to use the bow from early childhood as a way of life. The historical evidence for these archers is very real and surprisingly detailed. One of the best documented examples comes from a man named Longinus Dacius, a Syrian archer who lived in the early 2nd century. Longinus served in the cohors Prima Hamiorum Sagittaria, the first cohort of Hamian archers. Longinus and his fellow Hamian archers were stationed not in the warm Mediterranean, but all the way on the northern edge of the Roman world in Britain, specifically at forts like Carrhae and housesteads along Hadrian's Wall. That's a journey of over 1,700 miles from Syria to northern England, the equivalent of traveling from Los Angeles to New York and then some. Imagine that, a man born in the deserts of the Middle East, standing guard in the cold, rainy hills of Britain, bow in hand, watching for barbarians in the mist. It's not just a testament to Roman logistics. It shows how far Rome was willing to go to maintain a balanced army. We even know how long he served, 25 years. That was the standard enlistment for an auxiliary soldier, and when he finally completed his service, he received a discharge diploma, an official bronze certificate granting him Roman citizenship. For men like Longinus, service in the Sagittarii wasn't just a job. It was a path to honor, reward, and a new identity within the vast machinery of the Roman Empire. Archaeological digs along Hadrian's Wall have turned up altars, inscriptions, and even small shrines dedicated to Eastern gods, evidence that these Syrian soldiers carried their beliefs with them, integrating bits of their homeland into frontier life. In some forts, you can still find dedications to deities like Baal and a Targatus carved into stone centuries ago by men who had traveled farther than most people in the ancient world ever dreamed of. In a way, the auxilia system didn't just make Rome stronger, it made Rome more global. It blended traditions, languages, and religions under one banner. A Roman army camp in Britain might include men from Syria, Crete, Thrace, and North Africa, all fighting under the same eagle standard. And that mix of people brought something extraordinary to Rome, skills and technologies the legions themselves didn't possess. While Romans trained with simple wooden bows, weapons with limited range and penetration, useful mostly for training, hunting, or small skirmishes, the auxilia archers carried something far more advanced, the composite bow. It was an engineering masterpiece, small, powerful, and deadly efficient, perfect for both infantry and cavalry. This is how it was made. A composite bow wasn't carved from a single piece of wood like the old-fashioned salve bow. Instead, it was built from layers of entirely different materials, a wooden core, horn on the belly, the side facing the archer, and sinew animal tendons glued on the back. Each layer played a role. When you drew the string, the horn compressed, the sinew stretched, and together they stored far more energy than plain wood ever could. That's why a composite bow could launch arrows farther and with much greater force, up to 150 meters effectively, and sometimes as far as 200 meters in the right conditions. However, these bows were high-tech for their time, and that also meant they were a nightmare to maintain. The glue that held the layers together wasn't like modern resin. It was organic, made from fish bladders or animal hide, and that meant humidity was the enemy. If the bow got wet for too long, the glue could soften, the layers could warp, and the weapon might literally fall apart in your hands. That's one reason Roman archers in damp regions like Gaul or northern Britain had to take precautions. coating their bows in lacquer or tree bark, or sometimes switching to simpler all-wood bows. The humid climate of Western Europe didn't suit these delicate weapons. In contrast, in the drier East Assyria, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the composite bow flourished. Because these bows were so specialized, Rome couldn't just hand them out to every soldier. Making one could take months and required craftsmen who knew how to shape horn, stretch sinew, and balance the layers perfectly. That's where the fabricae, military workshops, came in. Rome had these facilities scattered across the empire. Some produced arms locally, others imported finished bows from the east where the craft had centuries of tradition. And when those archers took the field, they were equipped for mobility. They wore light armor, leather jerkins, or padded jackets for foot archers and flexible scale or mail for cavalry archers. This gave them a balance of protection and agility. Their arrows, carefully crafted with iron or bronze tips, came in different shapes depending on the target. The bodkin tip, long and narrow, could pierce chain mail or thick clothing, making it the ancient equivalent of an armor-piercing round. Each archer carried a quiver designed for quick access and often had spare bowstrings and maintenance tools, because in the middle of a campaign, losing your string could mean losing your weapon. If we were to put all this into perspective, the difference between the Roman Arcus compositus composite bow and Arcus ligneus wooden bow says a lot about how the empire worked. The composite bow was powerful but demanding, high maintenance, costly, and climate sensitive. The wooden bow used by legionaries, by contrast, was cheap, durable, and easy to replace. So while the Arcus compositus dominated the dry east, the simpler Arcus ligneus found its place in the wetter west and in training camps across the empire. By the 4th and 5th centuries AD, the Roman Empire wasn't the same unstoppable juggernaut it once was. The old days of rigid legions marching in perfect lines were fading fast. Rome was now facing a completely different kind of enemy, fast-moving nomadic warriors from the east who lived and breathed archery on horseback. The Huns were the most terrifying of them all. They could fire deadly volleys while riding at full speed, hit targets from astonishing distances, and vanished before the Romans could even close the gap. On top of that, the Sassanid Persians, heirs to the Parthians who had humiliated Crassus centuries earlier, fielded their own elite cavalry archers and armored cataphracts. Rome's old playbook, built around heavy infantry and short-range combat, no longer worked. The pressure was enormous. The empire had to adapt or die. And so Rome started to borrow again, this time from the very people who threatened it. The Roman army began adopting Hun-style tactics, weapons, and even equipment. Military manuals from the period mention new types of saddles that allowed archers to shoot accurately while galloping, as well as redesigned composite bows modeled after steppe designs. By the early 5th century, this change was no longer experimental, it was institutional. We know this from one of the most valuable documents of the late empire, the Notitia Dignitatum. It's basically a massive list of all the Roman military units active around that time. And what's fascinating is how many archery and mounted archery units it includes. The Sagittarii were no longer a side branch of the auxilia. They were an integral part of the army structure. On the battlefield, tactics evolved too. In earlier centuries, archers had simply supported infantry, but now they were shaping the very rhythm of battle. In major engagements, they were deployed behind the front ranks, often protected by tightly packed infantry formations similar to the old phalanx. Their job, to slow down, disrupt, or outright stop enemy advances before contact was even made. Byzantine military treatises written by the Eastern Roman successors describe sophisticated tactics where archers were positioned in deep square formations with each man carrying about 100 arrows. Supply carts followed behind, loaded with spare quivers to ensure the flow of fire never stopped. It is estimated that a formation like this could launch thousands of arrows in a matter of minutes. A wall of missiles so dense it could darken the sky and shred cavalry charges before they reached striking distance. It was a far cry from the Roman tactics of old. This was no longer about the brute courage of a soldier hurling his pilum and closing for the kill. It was about coordination, logistics, and timing. About mastering a new kind of warfare where precision and endurance mattered more than individual valor. All of this led to a deeper transformation in identity. For centuries, the Roman ideal of a soldier was tied to the virtues of the citizen legionary, a man who fought face to face with shield and sword, proving his bravery in the press of close combat. Using a bow was, to the Roman mindset, something foreign, even unmanly. But by the late Empire, the battlefield had changed so much that this old code no longer made sense. Cavalry, and especially mounted archers, now defined the future of war. Rome started recruiting entire units of horse archers. Some trained internally, others made up of foreign mercenaries like the Cumani and Heruli. The empire even employed Hunnic units themselves as foederati, allied troops under Roman command, because their skill was simply unmatched. But this wasn't easy. Training an effective mounted archer was an entirely different challenge from turning out an infantryman. It required years of practice from childhood, mastering not only the bow, but also the coordination between riding and shooting, skills that steppe nomads had been perfecting for generations. For Rome, which traditionally trained soldiers in a matter of months, this was a logistical nightmare. Maintaining these troops was costly, complex, and often dependent on foreign expertise. Still, necessity outweighed pride. Rome learned, sometimes reluctantly, that adaptability, not tradition, was the key to survival. So, the real question isn't why didn't Roman legionaries use bows, but why didn't they need to? Because Rome had already found a better system, one that used specialists from every corner of the empire to fill in the gaps. They didn't just conquer by strength, they conquered by adaptation. And that's perhaps the most Roman lesson of all. Empires don't endure because they're invincible. They endure because they know how to change, even when change means letting go of what once defined them. That's it for today's episode. If you love uncovering the forgotten sides of history, give this video a like and share it with another history lover. Subscribe to Heroic History so you can be here for tomorrow's tale as we dive into another battle, another empire, another moment that shaped our world. Thanks for watching. Take care, and we'll see you again tomorrow.